Oftentimes we only think of film as a visual medium, and it is not hard to figure why. When we think about our favourite moments from films, we usually think about the images that persist. Now I'm talking about the glorious long shots, the beautiful mediums, and the intimate close-ups. Within Ingmar Bergman's oeuvre itself, we do not need to look particularly hard to find images that are entrenched in filmic culture. We easily remember his chest in with death, this shot of Monika on a boat, and the extremely composed close-ups of persona. So as powerful as Bergman's images are, I would like to dedicate this essay to discussing an aspect that is overlooked in films in general and in Bergman's films as well: dialogue. The prevalence of dialogue as a cinematic device is something the modern audience takes for granted. One usually thinks of dialogue as mere noise that distracts audiences from the visual storytelling of filmmaking. Not only is what deemed cinematic usually only visual in nature, the whole bevy of bad screenwriters who use dialogue exclusively for exposition gives writing dialogue at all a bad name. Show no tell is the mantra taught to beginner writers of every single writing medium. This mantra pervades writing novels, stage plays, and of course screenplays. The question I'd like to pose to viewers, however, is this: does a strict adherence to such a mantra end up excluding the writer from using what may be otherwise a very potent dramatic device? Is dialogue mere exposition, or can it be something more? Enter Scenes from a Marriage. Scenes from a Marriage follows the life of a married couple across several years in 6-part episodes. For the purposes of this essay, I'll be looking at the televised version of the film, as it is both longer and also because it was the primary means upon which the series was intended to be consumed. So as much as Scenes from a Marriage depicts the growth and evolution the married couple goes through as they navigate their relationship, I would like to suggest that this miniseries is not just about a couple figuring their relationship out, but that this miniseries is also about two people discovering their own identities within the dynamic of a marriage. Though this is a scene that may be quickly forgotten, especially as it is the first scene of a 5-hour-long miniseries, Bergman actually foregrounds the primary exploration of this miniseries with this one throwaway sentence.
Alltså, frågan är: hur skulle ni vilja beskriva er själva i några få ord?
Ja, det var ju inte lätt.
Så svårt är det väl inte heller, va?
A seemingly throwaway question that immediately foregrounds the entire miniseries. Johan quickly and confidently describes himself as extremely intelligent, successful, youthful, well-balanced, and sexy. He continues at length describing who he is and what he believes makes up his identity. Marianne, on the other hand, only has this to say.
Vad ska jag säga nu då? Jag är gift med Johan och har 2 döttrar.
No matter if they have a lot to say about themselves or not, one thing is certain. Both characters at the beginning of the miniseries are very comfortable with their identities and their marriage. In a later scene, we see them witness a very brutal fight between another married couple, and when the married couple leave, they discuss self-assuredly.
Jag vet varför Katarina och Peter har ett helvete med varandra.
Alltså?
De talar inte samma språk. De måste översätta till ett tredje begripligt språk för att de ska fatta vad de menar.
Jag tror att det är mycket enklare än så.
Se på oss, vi talar ju om allt möjligt och förstår varandra på ögonblicket. Det är för att vi talar samma språk. Det är därför vi har det så bra.
Jag tror att det är pengarna.
Not only is this hubris, they assume that 1. They understand each other, and 2. They understand themselves. Come the end of episode 1, we begin seeing hints of misunderstandings. This builds up in episode 2 when Johan makes a mysterious phone call, and then climaxes here in episode 3.
Jag kom hit ikväll för att jag ville tala med dig om en sak. Jag har gått och blivit kär, förstår du.
The exploration of identity within the realm of marriage is thus what Bergman seems to be exploring in Scenes from a Marriage. Following Johan's confession, Johan goes on to claim a new identity, whereas Marianne begins realizing that hers is falling apart. What then follows the rest of the series is Johan and Marianne both trying to determine where they stand as both a couple and as individuals. The primary means through which Bergman presents this exploration of identity then seems to be dialogue. It is not just that Bergman has short scenes from a marriage with just people talking to each other. Oftentimes we are introduced to events, characters, places, and past lives, all through Johan and Marianne relating them to each other. But this is not just mere expository narration Bergman is giving us. In their talking to each other, We learn more about how a certain event has affected a character more than the character will be willing to let on. David Botwell has this to say about art cinema narration in his book Narration in the Fiction Film. Concerned less with action than reaction, the art cinema presents psychological effects in search of their causes. The dissection of feeling is often represented as therapy and cure, but even when it is not, causation is often break, and the more introspective characters pause to seek the cause of their feelings. Characters retard the movement of the plot by telling stories. Even if a character remains unaware of or inarticulate about his or her mental state, the viewer must be prepared to notice how behavior and setting can give the character away. The art cinema developed a range of mise-en-scène cues for expressing character mood. Static postures, covert glances, smiles that fade, aimless walks, emotion-filled landscapes, and associated objects. Within the story world, psychological realism consists of permitting a character to reveal the self to others and, inadvertently, to us. Now let's return to the scene where Johann admits his infidelity to Marianne. Notice how as he is admitting to his affair, we the audience are not just listening to what he is saying, but we are also looking at his eyes and his expression as he is doing so. In his admitting to his infidelity, while we the audience are interested in the unfolding details of the affair, we want to know something more. Is Johann feeling guilty about it? Is he ashamed? Is he confused? My take on it is that he is trying to find some honesty and sincerity in his admission so that he may perhaps lessen his guilt. I understand that this may be a difficult exercise to follow if you have not watched the series, but do feel free to watch it after this video to test my hypothesis. Let us then consider Marianne. Here's a wife who has since the beginning of the series admitted to only seeing herself in relation to her husband and her family. Our interest then as the audience is in how she is taking this news. Does she get angry? Will she cry? Know that this is a woman who tends to stray from confrontation with her husband. Marianne believes in communication. How then does she choose to communicate given this piece of news? It is at this point that I wish to take this discussion one step further. I think given Bergman's extensive experience in directing both the stage and the camera, it would not then be too much of a stretch to suggest the possibility that Bergman the film director might have influenced Bergman the stage director, and that Bergman the stage director might have likewise influenced his films. Igor Thornquist in his comparative essay examining Bergman between the stage and screen has pointed out that most of Bergman's early films, for example, are in fact disguised plays, with several of them divided into acts or scenes. This, of course, is something that is observable in Scenes from a Marriage. With regards to his use of the camera and editing, Thornquist noticed that Bergman is more interested in pictorial composition than in camera movement, and that Bergman has a strong adherence towards continuity editing, panning, and long takes. Both of these creative decisions, Thornquist continues, then seems to suggest a de-emphasis of cinematic framing in favor of what is closer to stage settings. Though Thornquist also goes at length at how Bergman also tends to import other theatre techniques, I'd like to go a step further by suggesting one more theatrical technique that Bergman seemed to have brought into his films: the soliloquy. Now, I understand that this is quite a contentious claim to make, and one might in fact ask, how can a film even hope to make realistic soliloquies like that we experience in the theatre? I would suggest that such a disagreement might stem from the confusion of what a soliloquy is. It is at this point that I would like to invoke James Hurst in his investigation of the soliloquies of a certain very famous playwright.
To be or not to be? That is the question.
Hurst claims that a very precise set of interrelated conventions govern the soliloquies and asides in Shakespeare's theatre. A soliloquy, for want of a better term, represents words spoken by a character to himself or herself. An aside, on the other hand, represents a soliloquy guarded from the hearing of other characters. A character who was aware of the presence of other characters could thus guard a soliloquy in an aside. A character cannot guard a soliloquy from other characters if they are unaware of their presence, however. Even then, a soliloquy guarded in an aside from a second character can still be overheard by a third character if the soliloquizer was unaware of the third character's presence. All soliloquies, even those guarded in asides, thus represented speech acts rather than thought. Take this scene from Hamlet, for example. Here Hamlet, having experienced great trouble in his life, thus contemplates suicide. Though this may well be just Hamlet thinking to himself, we the audience are however privy to the knowledge that as Hamlet is saying this, two men are in fact behind the mirror listening to his suicidal thoughts. A soliloquy therefore is not merely the thoughts of an individual, but thoughts being spoken out loud. Still not convinced? Consider the balcony scene in Romeo and Juliet. Here Juliet professes her love to the empty night sky, not knowing that Romeo is actually in the vicinity, listening to her confession.
Romeo, doff thy name, and for thy name, which is no part of thee, take all myself.
I take thee at thy word.
Still not convinced? Consider this adaptation of Macbeth's Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow soliloquy. Here Macbeth laments the futility of life to his dead queen in the presence of others, with these other people being outwardly horrified by his words and actions. The soliloquy therefore is not just mere thought, but a speech act. So what's the point of me going on so long about what soliloquies are? My argument is that past a certain point, dialogue ceases being dialogue. Dialogue suggests a two-way conversation with both people talking. In Scenes from a Marriage, however, we sometimes see otherwise. In Scenes from a Marriage, we sometimes see a person outwardly expressing at length their thoughts and feelings. Past a certain point, dialogue ceases being dialogue. Past a certain point, dialogue becomes soliloquy.
Hör på nu för helvete och sitt upp, hör på nu! Fast du inte har ett skit med saken att göra.
In this sequence, Johan has grown frustrated at Marianne for not understanding that he desires a clean break. He goes at length describing how meticulous he has been in making sure that despite the break, he has made sure the family will be provided for, and that it is his intention to completely disappear. Having done that, he continues.
Vet du vad jag är mest trött på av allt? Ja, det är det här jävla tjatet om vad vi ska göra, om vad vi måste göra, om vilka hänsyn vi måste ta.
Johan's soliloquy thus goes one step further, discussing what he believes caused the relationship to flounder. Here he is not merely providing exposition, he is revealing his innermost thoughts and feelings. If this is not personal enough yet, Johan still goes one step further.
Jag vet att jag är orättvis. Jag vet att allting jag säger nu är alldeles åt helvete. Jag vet att vi har haft ett bra liv. Och jag tror att jag egentligen fortfarande älskar dig. Ja, jag tror faktiskt att jag på något sätt älskar dig mer nu sen jag träffade Paula. Men kan du förstå den här bitterheten? Jag vet inte vad jag ska kalla det, den här bitterheten. Jag kan inte hitta på något bättre ord. Ingen kan ju förklara det för mig heller eftersom jag inte har en enda människa att tala med.
Here we have clearly seen that dialogue has given way to exposition, and then exposition has in turn given way to soliloquy. To claim that Bergman simply gets his characters to monologue is insufficient. Monologue just does not encapsulate what Bergman's characters do. They talk and they list out their anxieties and frustrations. They try to rediscover themselves where they have felt they lost their identities. This is what Borwell refers to as therapy and cure. Bergman's characters essentially talk, hoping to discover the reasons for their frustrations. That Bergman simply favours dialogue is not where I will be leaving my argument. I will persist by saying that Bergman at times favours it over other cinematic devices, even the camera. Bergman himself has this to say about the camera. The more excited, the more raw, horrible, brutal, or elaborate a scene is, the better it is to keep the camera an objective medium. If the camera gets all excited and begins skipping all over the bloody place, you lose a lot. It's you, the audience, who must feel it, whom it's got to strike. If the camera forces its way between and begins talking about its own emotions, usually it will just get in the way and prevent you from experiencing anything. The story mustn't only have a suggestive effect on the character, it must have a suggestive effect on you, and enable you to experience it all deep down inside you in your own cinematograph. Much more drastically, brutally, honestly, and voluptuously than I could ever show. In trying to keep the camera as an objective medium, Bergman employs the cinematic technique he is most famed for using, the close-up. The means through which Bergman employs the close-up is arguably his signature, and is explained by Gilles Deleuze here. The close-up does not tear away its object from a set from which it will form part. of which it would be a part, but on the contrary, it abstracts it from all spatial-temporal coordinates, that is to say, it raises it to the state of entity. The close-up is not an enlargement, and if it implies a change of dimension, this is an absolute change. A mutation of movement which ceases to be translation in order to become expression. What Deleuze is arguing here is that a close-up does not simply subtract a face from the rest of the body or from the space the character is in. Deleuze argues that a close-up basically destroys the face entirely. The close-up simply does not allow the face to continue existence. The face becomes something more. The face becomes expression. Put quite simply, a close-up here on Marianne ceases to be a close-up of Marianne. It simply becomes an image of grief. Notice how we, the audience, are almost prevented from recognizing Marianne as Marianne, even if we do know the subject of the camera is actually her. The camera prevents this recognition. We only see her eyes, the curvature of her lips, all of which instead of simply saying that Marianne is grieving, simply becomes an image which only says grief. Here we see Bergman obliterating the subject of his camera, if only so he can focus his audience on the exact reaction to Johann's words. Bergman's cinema finds its culmination in the obliteration of faces, Deleuze says. Here we have seen it as a reaction to another person's words. It must be noted that Bergman does not limit the obliteration of faces to reaction shots. He can do it with his active participants as well. The final scene of this episode, where Marianne talks to her friend on the phone about Johann's infidelity, featured this obliteration of the face. In this sequence again, though we know it to be Marianne speaking, we arguably only register the expressions on her face. Here Marianne's face has again been torn from the space around it. We first register grief when she begins recounting what has happened, only except when she finds out that her friends had already known of Johann's infidelity. We begin registering realization. Realization, however, soon gives way to anger, and then frustration, and finally, despair. If one is still not convinced of my argument, or if one wants to counter my argument by saying that Bergman's signature use of cinematography is in fact more visual than it is auditory, consider then this idea, that at no one point do we ever stop to think that we are witnessing a beautiful image. At no one point does the thought occur to us that this is a wonderfully composed shot. The camera vanishes to us. The image has given way to the word. If there's anything to be said about the dialogue Bergman writes, it is that it is meandering, confusing, and almost self-indulgent. His characters often talk at length, sometimes posing more questions than they could possibly answer, sometimes ending up more lost even as much as they want to be found. Perhaps something can be said about Bergman trying to replicate the confusion we constantly experience as we live life. That as stable as we might like to think our identities are, as sure as we may like to think we have the answers to all of life's questions, we may be one conversation away from our whole lives collapsing onto itself. What's left then is for us to only reconstruct ourselves from the debris. Quoting Bergman in the preface of the published script of Scenes from a Marriage, what more is there to say? This opus took 3 months to write, but a rather long part of my life to experience. I'm not sure that it would have turned out better had it been the other way around, though it would have seemed nicer. I have felt a kind of affection for these people while I've been occupied with them. They have grown rather contradictory, sometimes anxiously childish, sometimes pretty grown up. They talk quite a lot of rubbish, now and then saying something sensible. They are nervous, happy, selfish, stupid, kind, wise, self-sacrificing, affectionate, angry, gentle, sentimental, insufferable, and lovable. All jumbled out. Now, let's see what happens.